This speaker has a background, has worked in Silicon Valley. Today, she works as a service design lead for the Norwegian Refugee Council, but she's based in Berlin. For the Refugee Council, she's building digital tools to support the mission of the council and its interaction with its affected population. With digital products and services, they can contribute to negative social outcomes. We've seen many examples of that. And it's quite interesting that the humanitarian sector has developed its own tools and standards around the do no harm principle. So this begs the question, can we connect humanitarian practices with the service design process? And that's what we're going to explore in this session. Hopefully you learn something new about new service design tools and methods that can impact your process and maybe give you some other insights. If you remember one thing from this talk, it's that designers have an immense privilege, as our design decisions will impact real people in the real world. So use your responsibility wisely. Questions in the Slido, we'll do them after that. And now I want a big round of virtual applause for the next speaker, which is Cassie Jiun Seo. Are you ready, Cassie? There we are.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Let me share my screen. Okay.
Yes, it's on. Good luck and have fun.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Cassie Jiun Seo, and I'm a service design lead at Norwegian Refugee Council. So my talk, Do No Harm, is how might we embrace humanitarian practices for more ethical service design. And it's a huge joy for me to see us talking more and more and have more interest in this field of service design. So the Norwegian Refugee Council is a non-government organization, NGO, helping people being forced to flee. So we support people that are at risk or in dire need as a result of conflict, disaster, or human rights violation. We are active in about 35 different countries, and in 2019, we assisted a total of 9.1 million people. And that is only 11% of the total of 80 million people who were being forced to flee in 2019. So we constantly think about how can we best serve the other 90% that we weren't able to reach, and what could we do to support them. So my talk will be in 3 parts, where I share parallels between design, service design, and humanitarian aid work, and share some examples from humanitarian service design that me and my colleagues have gathered over years. So first, if design is art and science of devising intentional solution within constraint, I would say humanitarian aid workers, some of my colleagues, are one of the most empathetic, innovative, agile, and holistic service designers, solving some of the most challenging problems in some of the most challenging circumstances that I had ever seen. So just like how designers would optimize for user delight while balancing scope, business goals, user goals, and probably engineering technology as well, we optimize for our impact while balancing our project deliverables, schedules, and existing resources out there. And then all of what we do is not possible without inputs from the community that we are serving. And in the last 50 years, aid paradigm had a great shift, a paradigm shift from logistics and resource allocation, from I will provide you with what I have, to really provisioning and devising services that are tailored to the needs of the people. And of course, we cannot do that without inputs from the community or designing the services together with the community. And what makes our job a bit harder or hard in general is that currently the displacement rate is higher than ever. Actually, more than 1% of the humanity, 1 in every 97 people, are displaced. So given the circumstance, we are almost forced to think creatively in order to optimize with what our limited resources businesses have, and then still deliver while staying true to our humanitarian mandate of doing no harm. So of course, our design, both humanitarian aid project design and service design, does not exist in a vacuum. It will be used by real people out in the real world. And sometimes our well-meaning design have negative impact in the real world. So here I will be talking about two examples where design impact was rather harmful despite of its original intention. So first is on Airbnb. It started as a great design solution to a question. Hey, let's make it easy for people to post apartments online. So in Athens, Greece, there are over 9,000 Airbnbs as of 2019. And half of the Airbnbs are owned by hosts who actually own multiple units. And obviously, this had resulted in a significant rent increase and gentrification of a neighborhood. So as a result, longtime residents were displaced and being pushed out of the city. And what happened is that this situation led to more hostile and unwelcome atmosphere for Athens city visitors. Was this an intentional decision? I don't think so. Another example is when aid had gone wrong. So this is from 2010 in Sindh community in Pakistan. There was a massive flood. So a group of NGOs got together to build shelter, and they had wonderful intention. We will only use local material sourced locally, and bamboo will be our material of choice. So this was great intention and great reasoning, which was to revitalize local markets, and this is to be eco-friendly. So what ended up happening was that this uncoordinated response had greatly inflated price of bamboo, which is the primary building material in the community, nearly 3 times. And projects were significantly delayed because it was harder for people to procure or purchase this material. So people that we were meant to support actually remained homeless for much longer time. And the trust in the community was severed. So these are 2 examples from tech and humanitarian design failures, where design outcomes are not what designer may have intended. So then this begs us a question: how can we make our design more ethical? How can we avoid these unwanted consequences? So I will share 5 examples that that I have gathered from my own experience and my colleagues' experience over years on our attempt to make our design a bit more considerate, thoughtful, and less harmful, and actually more efficient as well. So first is really asking, what are the assumptions that we currently hold, and have we validated those assumptions? So first story comes from Democratic Republic of the Congo, which I will refer to as DRC. And DRC is one of the largest NRC operations, and it is the world's 2nd largest displacement crisis after Syria. So in 2019, we heard the news that an entire town in Ituri province had been displaced after a violent attack on civilians. So NRC Emergency Response Unit immediately went there to help. So we went with a pretty good idea of how to best support them, partly from years of experience of having worked in emergency settings, and partly based on what existing data and research from the past interventions showed. And then the needs were like we thought usual, like food, water, life-saving kits, blankets, and so on. However, this time, instead of immediately purchasing and transporting immediate emergency aid kits, we asked the community, what are the 3 things that you need the most right now, and how could we best support you? And people's response was 2 weeks. And it turned out that there would be a final exam for primary school graduation in 2 weeks. And their kids need to pass the exam, and they don't have the money to pay for it, because they had already paid the school dues in the old school district that they fled from. So we paid for school graduation exam for all students. And here we went in with assumptions, not only about the people, but also our responsibilities as aid workers, which led us to question if we provide food, shelter, water, immediate life-saving assistance, does that fulfill our job as humanitarians? And I would like us to ask the same question. If we fulfill our design brief, if we fulfill our business needs, do we fulfill our job as designers here? So do ask what your current assumptions about your users and your roles and responsibilities are. The second is knowing the stress context very well and minimizing the severity of potential harm from this stress context. So this is a story from Lebanon, from another humanitarian organization. So gender-based violence amongst displacement community is obviously a very big issue. And actually 1 in every 5 women in crisis is a survival of some form of gender-based violence. And what often happens is that women often refrain from reporting their experiences and ask for help because they fear the stigma. And this makes them even more vulnerable to repeated offenses. So here the question was, how could we create a private and effective channel for survivors of domestic violence to report their experience and receive support quickly? And then in the community, we saw that mobile phones were highly utilized, and background research said about 95% of people had an access to a phone. So this organization decided to make an app where people can inform themselves about their rights, but also report their concerns and situation to a caseworker. However, what had not been taken into a deep consideration was that 2/3 of women shared a device with their partners and family members. So we started questioning, could our product put our users in even more harm than good? So one design recommendation from here was to make sure that these messages that people exchange would self-destruct itself after it has been read or opened. So the key here is know your context, especially the stress context, and ask why this is causing stress, and design with respect to it. And then third is thinking about unwanted consequences from your design decision, especially for your most extreme users and your worst edge cases. So this is actually a story from Syria, which is the world's largest displacement now in its 10th year. But despite this crisis and displacement, education still has to go on. So we, NRC, plan to rebuild schools and host classes there. And then our plan was met with some hesitation from the community and also staff. So here are some findings from our risk assessment. So what would happen is that every student, every pupil enrolled in school in classes will have to be registered in the student database. And the student database would contain names, address, age, and gender of students. And this is a very complex and volatile context where there were so many things that could possibly go wrong. What if a classroom gets besieged? What if database get hacked? What would we do? And then one of the biggest risks we identified was that this personal information is to be used in forced recruitment in the militia for the school-aged children. And this risk was severe and evident, especially for the boys. So we shifted the project direction entirely and decided to focus on girls. And in this context, girls would have much less risk of the worst ever case. So sometimes we have to think that our users cannot really opt in and opt out of our design decisions. And you have to assess potential risk that your design is posing and try your best to stop it. So here, the lesson is to consider potential risks and also consider ethics behind this risk. And the fourth one is asking, are we being inclusive? Who are the silent and unrepresented voices that we might not be speaking with right now? So this is from Baidua settlement in Somalia. So when we start working with the community, we would start our community engagement process to understand their needs. And a focus group is one of the common tools to do that. So we held focus group meetings to understand people's needs and their experiences. What we found out was that women were silent. And actually, teenage boys were all speaking up for their mothers. And we had to find ways to speak with this woman. So some NRC staff acted out some real life situations that may happen in a community in various settings, and we filmed it. So these are interactions that we would see at marketplaces, interactions that we would see at a community meeting. And then we held a drama night and then invited women from the community. And women there started talking and commenting whether the situation we acted out is true or not. And in the drama night, they did not have to be represented by their male family members. So the question here at hand is, how could we listen to our silent users, not just the most obvious voices in the room? And how could we reach them? And are we missing anyone? Are we forgetting anyone? And the next one is examining the power dynamic and the context, including your own place in the system. So this is also from Somalia, but from a different community, different province. So the project here and our goal was economic empowerment of women. And we, from our background research and our findings, show that women were facing issues with inheritance, property, land, and home ownership right. So we wanted to support and help with that. So we built the Legal Aid Center for Women. But the center was not utilized as we had wished it to be. And then we wanted to find out why. So what we found out was that there was a heavy stigma and backlash from the community against women who are utilizing these centers. And there was also a rumor that a Western organization is promoting divorce and planting these ideas to separate families. So what we ended up doing is we actually dismantled the center. And then we actually rebuilt the center as a community center instead of legal aid center in the heart of a very vibrant marketplace. So, and now it's accessible for both men and women. And then people that are accessing this would be much easier. And then we also trained, we didn't just focus on women, but then we also trained men in the community in listening skills and made sure that women were represented in a community center committee and like meetings going forward. So here the question is, what is the existing power dynamic and socio-cultural context in the community? And what am I missing? And also, where is my place in it? So these are examples from the humanitarian sector, but I believe they could be applied in any sector. And we, like in humanitarian aid work, we strive to make our projects more ethical and more inclusive as much as possible, while as we are juggling with very limited resources, rapid delivery of project life cycles, volatile and ever-changing circumstances, and also sometimes physical danger of being in a certain volatile context. And if we try to do it, and if we have a mandate to make to not cause harm as much as possible, you can do it too. So here are 3 questions that you can ask yourself and your team. So first is that we designers have immense privilege to affect our users through our design decisions. And we want to ask the right questions before it's too late and minimize unwanted consequences from our design as much as possible. So let's ask, could my design cause any harm to any of my users? Am I seeing the whole picture or not? And the second question is that your privilege is like a blind spot when you are designing. So when you're designing, make sure to notice your blind spots and ask questions. What are they caused by? Where did they come from? And your awareness will translate into your design philosophy and principles that you will find invaluable in this ever-changing circumstances. So do ask you and your team, what is my privilege and responsibility that come with this privilege? And at the end of the day, sometimes we have to accept that I or we may not be equipped to design for all experiences, despite of however many user interviews, field studies, observations, and surveys that I do. And at NRC, more than 90% of the staff in the project design and delivery team are from the local or target community that we serve. Their inputs and insights are so valuable in understanding cultural, socio-political context, but also in reaching silent users and evaluating our impact. So does your team represent users or experiences that you are designing for? This is a tumultuous time for us navigating in 2020, and it feels exhausting as if we are in a constant struggle without an end. And for us working in humanitarian aid, it really sometimes does feel like we are in a fight without an end too. But I want to urge you to continue fighting. We have so much power and responsibility to ensure our designs do no harm. So continue to ask questions and continue to think over and over on how your design is impacting the world, and continue to contribute to a better version of the world that you believe in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cassie. That was great. Amazing examples. A quite distant world, literally, for a lot of people, I think. We have 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session, so I'm going to invite Louise and Peter back onto the virtual stage. Hey, Louise, and Peter should be back also in a second.